So the site we're looking at is a Brockway disc golf course in Rosemount, Minnesota. To start off with, I'll tell you a little bit about the site. So the site was formerly a golf course, and that was right up until about 2005. So back then there was a maintenance plan in place, but currently there is no maintenance plan. There's no cultivation, no aeration, no fertilization, all those kind of things. Just mowing is the plan, so they mow once or twice a week, and that's about it. So the site is mostly covered by turf, and there are quite a few wooded areas all around the course too, so those are going to be dense wooded stands. In general, the site is fairly successful. There are a few problems, but it's nothing major. A few minor problems, so a few turf problems, a few weed problems, and then soil compaction is a big issue there. But for the most part, it's nothing major, I mean. So the species on the site, a lot of weeds. So there's broadleaf plantain, quackgrass, crabgrass, black medic, dandelion, bull thistle, white clover. So a lot of weeds. The trees are mostly old oak stands, so there's some white oak, pin oak, bur oak, and sumac. And then the turf throughout the site is a Kentucky bluegrass. So we were unable to identify the varieties of Kentucky bluegrass that were on the site. But we do know that it is all Kentucky bluegrass. And the big problem with that is that it's not an appropriate species in a lot of the areas, so I'll get to this later, but I'll just touch on it right now. Kentucky bluegrass isn't shade tolerant, so it's not going to do well in a lot of the shady areas on the site. So a little bit of soil information. We were able to get a soil test from the University of Minnesota, and these are the results that we got. So just a couple of minor problems with the soil. It's nothing major. These are easily fixed. So the soil texture, a medium soil texture, which is great. Organic matter is going to be right around 6%. Soil pH is going to be right around 6.6, so that's pretty good. Phosphorus in parts per million is 20. Potassium in parts per million is 99, and there is no lime in the soil at all. So the main problems that we are seeing after looking at the site and visiting the site and kind of assessing everything that we saw, drainage, not a big issue, but still could be an issue sometimes. Leaf litter in the fall was a big thing that we saw. Soil compaction is a huge issue. Shade is a really big issue, and weeds, a pretty big issue there as well. So drainage, it's not a big issue, and the site does a pretty good job of taking care of the drainage problems itself. So the site has mostly sandy soil, which is great because the water can just run right through the soil. It's not going to get clogged up like in a clay soil. The topography of the site also naturally encourages water movement, so the water is going to flow from the high points to the low points really well. The site's laid out very well in that way, so that's awesome. And then the main times that we're going to see drainage as an issue, only a couple times a year, so during really heavy rainstorms, maybe in the spring and summer, and then the spring melt could be a big issue too. So there are a couple of low spots with no drainage at all, so all the water that flows away from the rest of the site pools into the low spots. So during those heavy rains or the spring melt, it could be an issue, easily fixed with some minor manipulation of the land or a couple of drains, but again, it's a minor problem. A big problem that we did see was soil compaction, but that's a very easy fix. So given that it's a disc golf course, it's going to be a really high foot traffic area, and with a lot of people walking on the soil, that soil's been really compacted, and when it's compacted, the nutrients and the water can't really get into the soil very well. So easy fix for that is going to be aeration. So we would recommend aerating twice every year, once in the spring and once in the fall. So in the spring, just open it up and let the water and the nutrients, and seed too if you seed in the spring, really work themselves in there. And then in the fall, after a season of traffic, that's going to be a good option. And then just on aeration, make sure you're using the hollow core tines. So the solid core tines can sometimes compact the soil worse than it was before. So with the hollow core tines, it'll actually take the cores of soil out of the turf areas instead of just compacting it worse. So leaf litter was also a problem that we saw. As you can see in the picture, there are a ton of leaves on the ground, and it doesn't look like they're going to get cleaned up, or they haven't been cleaned up yet when we looked at the site. So with all the trees on the site, that's going to be an issue. So the turf isn't exposed to the sunlight when the leaves are down, so it's not going to be able to photosynthesize. And then also, if the leaves are left on the turf over the winter, that's going to be really bad in the spring. So it's an easy fix for that one too. Just mulch them or get rid of them somehow. You can use a track back, you can rake them up, but I think the best fix would be to mulch the leaves. So instead of using a mowing kit on a mower, you can use a mulching kit, and that'll just crunch the leaves up into tiny pieces and disperse them so that they're not gigantic piles of leaves all over the site. One big issue was shade, and this was a problem all over the whole site. So I touched on this before, that Kentucky bluegrass isn't a good species in shade, and because of the tree cover on the site, there is a lot of shade, and it's very dense shade. So the grass that's there isn't doing very well in the areas where the shade is, where the trees are. So on those border areas where the turf grass comes up and meets the woodland line, that grass is very thin, it's very sparse, and it's not doing well. So a couple of ways that we can fix that. We would recommend pruning the trees, so just once every few years, just thin them out, kind of around the border where the woodland meets the turf grass. Just on the trees around the edge, just thin them out so that a little bit more sunlight can get to the grass. Or another solution would be to overseed with a better species that's going to be more appropriate for the area. So the recommendation that we would make is a tall fescue. So tall fescue is a really great species for this area. It's extremely shade tolerant and wear tolerant, so it's going to do really well around the borders where it's shady, and there's still going to be people walking around, and it's very wear tolerant. So that's going to be a great option to put that in. Another issue that we saw throughout the site was weeds, and there were a lot of them. So there's no herbicide in place right now, or no weed fighting plan pretty much. So that could be a combination of a couple of things. So there's a lot of shade on the site, and as I just said, the Kentucky bluegrass doesn't do well, and so when that grass thins out, the weeds are going to come in and they're going to thrive because they don't have any competition. So as long as the turf is struggling, there are going to be a lot of weed problems. So a lot of ways to fix this problem. An easy solution would be an herbicide if it's in the budget. So an herbicide, just to spray that in the spring before the weeds germinate, or right as they're germinating, to kill them off. Or seeding, so putting in more grass every year, just before the weeds germinate. Just get some grass in there, and that's gonna take up space, so there's not going to be any other areas for the weeds to germinate. And then fertilizer once you have the grass down. So as long as the grass is thriving, it's doing well, it's soaking up nutrients, those weeds aren't going to be able to compete. So product recommendations that we've got for this site: a tall fescue blend for seeding. So again, it's a very wear tolerant and very shade tolerant grass. So along all the shady parts of the site, which is a lot of the site, that's going to be a really great option. And a 20-10-20 fertilizer, applied at about a pound of nitrogen per 1,000 square feet. So that's going to promote really healthy stands of turf. As long as there's new grass going in, you want to encourage it to grow, you want to get it strong and healthy, and that's going to be a really great way to do that. And then an herbicide that I would recommend is it's a product called Momentum FX2, and so that should be applied at about 3 to 4 pints per acre. So that's going to help control a lot of the weed species, and I think all of them that are on the site. So that's something that can be applied in the spring after the new grass has germinated, or if you're not planning on seeding, you can just apply it in the spring, and that's going to be something that's going to knock out the weeds before they even germinate. So with all these recommendations in mind, I think that the site can be hugely improved, and a very successful site in general.